It's midway through this season, and Verstappen and Red Bull are leading the championships. There have been a lot of incidents that positively and negatively affected the drivers this year. So, how would the championships look if specific incidents such as DNFs, safety cars, etc., did not happen? Who is the luckiest and unluckiest drivers this year? Well, let's find out. First of all, we will split incidents on track into three different categories. Type 1 incidents are not in control of a driver or his team. So you have safety cars, virtual safety cars, red flags, and some crashes and car damages. Next, we have type 2 incidents which are under the control of a driver's team but not under the control of a driver himself. So it includes car failures and bad strategy calls. And finally, type 3 incidents consist of both type 1 and type 2 incidents together. So we will look at each race this year and see where a driver would finish without type 1, type 2 and type 3 incidents. And then we will look at how many points the drivers of Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes potentially gain or lose because of these incidents. Round 1, Bahrain. None of the type 1 incidents, such as the safety car, affected the race result. The Red Bulls DNF'd and we classified that as a type 2 incident. Without those DNFs, the classification would have been Leclerc, Verstappen, Sainz, Perez, Hamilton and Russell. This also happens to be the race result without any type 3 incidents. Next up is round 2 in Saudi Arabia. Checo qualified on pole and led the race until a safety car brought out by Latifi's crash made him lose 3 positions to his teammate and the Ferraris. Without the safety car, Checo would have won the race as Leclerc could not overtake him due to his straight line speed. Also, the VSC at the end of the race allowed Verstappen to attack Leclerc as Leclerc could not warm up his tires well. Without the VSC, Charles would have finished P2 behind Perez. Hamilton had a good pace but was also affected by the safety car and virtual safety car, which helped the drivers around him get cheap pit stops. With a clean race, he surely could have finished P6. There were no type 2 incidents in this race and the results without type 3 incidents is same as without type 1 incidents. Round 3, and we have the Australian Grand Prix. The safety car gave Russell a cheap pit stop, enabling him to overcut Hamilton and Perez. He was overtaken by Perez later, but Russell finished ahead of Hamilton. Verstappen had an engine issue, retiring from the race on lap 38. This DNF is a type 2 incident. Without it, he would finish a comfortable P2 behind Charles. Without any type 3 incidents, the order of the race would be Leclerc, Verstappen, Perez, Hamilton and Russell, with Sainz crashing out due to his mistake. Round 4, we go to Imola. Sainz had a crash with Ricciardo, which was not his fault. So it is a type 1 incident. Without the crash, he would be sitting in P4 for most of the race and finish P3 after Charles' crash with the barriers. There were no type 2 incidents in this race as the teams gave the drivers reliable cars. Without type 1 and type 3 incidents, the finishing order would be Verstappen, Perez, Sainz, Norris, Russell, Bottas and Leclerc. Now, round 5. F1 returns to Miami after a long time. The safety car was called on lap 41, giving Russell a cheap pit stop. Again, it put him on fresh tires behind Hamilton and Bottas, giving him a straightforward overtaking opportunity on fresher, softer tires. The safety car also helped Hamilton close the gap to Bottas and allowed him to overtake his ex-teammate. Without the safety car, Russell was on for a P7 finish behind Hamilton in P6. The safety car did not affect the fight at the front though. Moving on to type 2 incidents, while there were no DNFs this race, Checo had an engine failure when catching up to Sainz. He lost a lot of lap time because of this issue, and without it, he likely could finish P3 ahead of Sainz, as his Red Bull had a big pace advantage in that race. So without Type 2 incidents, Perez finishes P3 and Sainz finishes P4. Round 6, Spanish Grand Prix. This race had many incidents. First up, Type 1 incidents. Hamilton crashed with Magnussen on lap 1, puncturing his tire. This was a racing incident and not Hamilton's fault. He had to make a pit stop and was 30 seconds behind the pack at the end of lap 1. He showed excellent race pace that day, and without the incident, he was on for a P2 finish behind Verstappen. Sainz took to the gravel on lap 7, which was clearly his fault. But he damaged his car during the process, and that was pretty bad luck. With the damage, he finished the race very close to Russell. Without the damage, he would have pipped George to have a finishing order of Verstappen, Hamilton, Perez, Sainz and Russell. Now moving on to Type 2 incidents. Leclerc had an engine failure and he DNF'd, stopping an easy win for him. Verstappen had a DRS failure, making it extremely difficult for him to pass George, but it did not affect the race result as he still finished P1. The ever-reliable Mercedes suffered from overheating that race, and its drivers had to lift and coast a lot at the end of the race. So Hamilton lost P4 to Sainz, but Russell could keep P3. Without any Type 2 incidents, the race result would be Leclerc, Verstappen, Perez, Russell, Hamilton and Sainz. Without the Type 3 incidents, Hamilton slots in behind Verstappen and Sainz finishes ahead of Russell. Let's move on to another crazy race in round 7 at Monaco. During his crucial outlap on the hard tires, Sainz was stuck behind Latifi for half a lap. This made him lose P1 to Perez as his outlap was slow. Moving on to Type 2 incidents, the Ferrari strategists made the biggest mistake of the race and probably the season so far to let Perez undercut Leclerc on the hardest track to overtake. The best strategy for Leclerc should have been a one-stop from wet to slicks. If Charles was given this strategy, P1 was very easy as he had a good gap to Sainz who was in P2. Without any Type 3 incidents, Ferrari could have had their second 1-2 of the season. Continuing the streak of incident-filled races, we move on to Baku for round 8. The virtual safety cars did not affect the race as the final positions would be the same regardless. But without the Type 2 incidents of the DNFs for the Ferraris, Leclerc would finish P2 and Sainz would finish P4. Perez would not be able to stay ahead of Charles as he did not have good pace. So the order would have been Verstappen, Leclerc, Perez, Sainz, Russell and Hamilton if there were no Type 2 or Type 3 incidents. F1 goes to Canada for round 9. This race had 2 virtual safety cars and a safety car, but it did not affect the result. For Type 2 incidents, there is a Perez DNF due to a gearbox issue. Without the gearbox issue, Perez might have caught up to Russell, but is unlikely to pass him as the Mercedes had good pace around this track. Leclerc did not have a car issue in this race, but he had issues in Spain and Azerbaijan, which forced him to take an engine penalty in Canada. Without a grid penalty, Leclerc could qualify in P1 or P2. Even if he started P2, Leclerc would surely finish P1 as the Ferrari was much quicker than the Red Bull on Sunday. Sainz put a lot of pressure on Verstappen at the end of the race, and we know this season that Leclerc is much quicker than Sainz. Had it been Charles putting pressure on Verstappen instead of Sainz, he could have passed him. So the results without Type 2 and without Type 3 incidents is Leclerc, Verstappen, Sainz, Hamilton, Russell and Perez. Round 10, British Grand Prix. This race had a lot going on. The crash at the start, Halo saving Joe, Russell DNF, Verstappen's floor damage, Ferrari strategy error and Perez comeback. So let's break it down. The Type 1 incidents are Russell's DNF. He was going to finish P6 without that. Red flag at the start. Without that, Hamilton would be P2 as he would be ahead of Leclerc at the start of the race and crucially very close to Sainz. Verstappen's floor damage. It was an easy win for him without that issue. Perez's wing damage. Without that, Perez is behind Leclerc and he is likely to finish P5. So the results without Type 1 incidents would be Verstappen, Hamilton, Leclerc, Sainz, Perez and Russell. For Type 2 incidents, there are no car damages, but there was a strategic error by Ferrari to not pit Leclerc under the safety car. We need to remember that without Type 2 incidents, we are still assuming that Type 1 incidents have occurred. So if Ferrari pitted both their drivers under the safety car, Leclerc would win the race. Hamilton would undercut Sainz in the pit stop as Ferrari had to double stack. He would later keep P2 as Sainz might not have overtaken him on the restart as Sainz would be busy defending from Perez. Perez had good straight line speed and tyre warm-up which helped him at the restart. So Leclerc, Hamilton, Sainz and Perez would be the finishing order without Type 2 incidents. The result without Type 3 incidents would be the same as without Type 1 incidents. Round 11. Austria. A less intense race compared to the previous Grand Prix. Perez's crash with Russell is a Type 1 incident. Without that, he will finish a solid P3 after Sainz retires from this race. In that case, the Mercedes drivers will finish P4 and P5. Without the Type 2 incident of Sainz engine blowout, he was on for a P2 finish ahead of Verstappen, as the Ferrari was much quicker than Red Bull on that race. This would relegate Hamilton to P4 and Russell to P5. Without the Type 3 incidents, the finishing order would be Leclerc, Sainz, Verstappen, Perez, Hamilton and Russell. So this rounds up the analysis. But we still haven't answered the crucial question. Who won or lost the most points? Due to Type 1 incidents, all the drivers lost out on points except George Russell. Hamilton is the driver who suffered the most, losing 18 points. This was mainly due to badly timed safety cars and his crash in Spain. Leclerc was the driver who was badly affected by mistakes from his team. He lost 84 points due to poor reliability and bad strategy calls. In comparison, his title rival Verstappen only lost 16 points. Overall, without Type 3 incidents, Leclerc will be leading the Drivers' Championship by 9 points and Red Bull leads the Constructors by 9 points. Leclerc lost 72 points and is the unluckiest driver this year, whereas Russell gained 25 points due to other drivers' bad luck and he is the luckiest driver this year. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please drop a like if you enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel to watch more F1 content.